skills in policy decision making. And then I'm very glad that we have Olga Chernikova sitting over there as discussant. And yeah, I'm very grateful that she will then discuss with us all the different papers. We now shall start with Julia. The first paper, we have 15 minutes each, and then about 5 minutes.
Maybe we have a little bit more time because
not so strict as now. One is strict.
Yeah. Thanks to Lars, and welcome also from my side. My name is Julia. So it's better? Hello? Can you Is it so better? No? Okay, thank you. Okay, I think now we can start. Also welcome from my side. And now I want to present you the project I conducted with Edith and Lars. And the name of our presentation is Simulations of Students' Communicative Competencies in Avatar and Video Camera-Based Environments. In order for prospective teachers to be successful in their professional activities, not only technical domain-specific competencies are necessary, also generic competencies are necessary. And communication competence is a generic competence which is needed for coping with specific tasks in the teaching profession. But teacher training programs often fail to test such skills. And so, also, the student teachers complain about the lack of practical relevance in education. In addition to this, there is a demand for innovative digital teaching learning formats, and they are increasing, especially in Germany. So, we developed an innovative teaching learning format in which simulations were conducted in 2 different virtual learning environments. And with 2 different virtual learning environments, we mean avatar-based interactions and also video camera-based interactions. In order to train communicative skills of prospective teachers, simulations are well suited. With simulations, we can test everyday life challenges under realistic guidance. In our project, we use performance-based simulations to capture action skills in authentic, application-oriented situations, but under controlled conditions. And the aim is here the generation of knowledge and the development of skills and attitudes. And I was talking always about the avatar and the video camera-based interactions. On the next slide, you can see some pictures of it. And we are talking here about role plays, which are a form of simulations. And we conducted them with pre-service teachers and professional actors who played the other part of the students, for example, pupils, superiors, or colleagues. Yeah. So here on the left side, you can see the avatar-based interaction. This is a conversation between the professional actor, I think it's the man on the left side, and the pre-service teacher, and also we had external observer who assessed the conversation between the teacher, the pre-service teacher, and the professional actor. And on the right side, there, you can see the video camera-based interaction. There we also had the professional actor, the student, and also an external observer. Our research question is, how do the 2 interaction formats, which are video camera-based and avatar-based interactions, affect the student learning experience during the simulation? And in an experimental design, we collected quantitative and qualitative data, and in total 61 students performed the simulations. We had 29 student teachers in general, 21 student teachers vocational, bachelor level, and 11 student teachers vocational master level. And we randomly assigned them into avatar-based interaction and video camera-based interactions before the simulations. To answer our research questions, we collected different data. Before the simulations, we collected the communicative competencies, which are self-assessed by the pre-service teachers with a Berliner evaluation instrument for self-assessed student competencies. And here you can see an example item. I can moderate conversations well. From 1 does not apply to 5 applies. This is a 5-point Likert item scale. During the simulations, we have performance-based simulations of communicative skills. This means the pre-service teachers get a pre-structured paper in which the conversation is described. And also we had an external observation, which we are measured by an evaluation sheet. And with this we can assess the observation and recording of conversation, design and goal achievement, but also we collected non- and paraverbal communication of the pre-service teachers. After the simulations, we conducted focus groups. This is a moderate group discussion, and there we asked the students about advantages and disadvantages of the interaction format and their experience during the simulation. And we evaluated it by qualitative content analysis by Meiring in Germany. And after the simulations, we also collected the communication competencies, which are self-assessed with a Berliner evaluation instrument. So here again, kindly reminder of our research question: how do the two interaction formats affect the student learning experience during the simulation? And we made a t-test of the external observation and the self-assessed communication competencies by the students after the simulation. And here you can see there's no empirical evidence in the two interaction formats, but we also collected the focus groups. And first I want to start with the avatar-based interactions. And here we can see on the pro side that the avatar-based interactions is pretty good for the students because the absence of gestures and facial expressions leads to less complexity because they can focus on the spoken word. They don't need non-verbal communication. And also they have the feeling that they can hiding behind the avatar, and the immersion leads to more authenticity. Also it's more authentic for the students, and also they have the feeling that they can relax in this format. But on the other side, we have the cons, and here you can see the absence of gestures and facial expressions leads to irritations because there's not a direct reaction which can be assessed of the other part. And sometimes it comes here to an interruption of flow of speech. The focus groups and the results of the video camera-based interactions. On the pro side, we have that difficult conversations become easier during the simulation, especially this role plays which are with power imbalance. And it's easier to criticize other people, for example, or a colleague. And the own home gave the students security, and they felt less tension. And it's good to use notes. On the con side, we have the video camera-based interaction, and the students were irritated by gestures and facial expressions because it's difficult to assess the facial expressions of the other part. Maybe when you think of a video conference you had with the eye contact, where do I look? Maybe I can look in the display, or I look in the camera, but when I look in the display, the person on the other side don't think I look at him or her. And here the simulation feels more like acting and not like a conversation. So now we are here by conclusion. Yeah, we have, with the t-test, we haven't seen empirical evidence, but in the interaction formats during the simulation, but it seems like that the avatar-based interactions are a good learning opportunity because we can there focus on the spoken word. And the video camera-based interaction leads to irritation because the nonverbal communication is difficult to interpret for all persons. Yeah. Then I think I'm finished. Thank you very much. If you have questions, feel free.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we have a lot of time to ask questions. So yeah, whatever it might be. Feel free. Yes, please.
Question. First, thank you very much. It's really interesting. I'm really interested in video-based learning and assessment. So that's a first thing. My question, could you remind me of the competence that you were trying to develop in that setting?
There's a communicative competence.
And was it, or like, so they were meant to interact with people where there is a hierarchy, so with colleagues or with the potential students?
The students here, the pre-service teachers, played the role plays with professional actors, and the professional actors played maybe colleagues of the teacher, so it's a conversation between teacher and teacher, or they played pupils, or a superior. I don't know if I can say supervisor, yeah. Yeah.
And when in the comparative setting where the actor or actress played a pupil,
Mm-hmm.
and the equivalent in the avatar setting, were there also adult avatars or pupil avatars?
Maybe I can show it. Yeah, it's a little bit small, but yeah, there are just adult avatars. Yeah.
Because I think that would be really interesting to see if you have the role-play simulation video-based with your camera chat,
Mm.
and in the avatar situation you have actual children,
Yeah.
and see whether that makes a difference with immersion and higher levels of authenticity.
Yeah.
That's what I don't know.
I think maybe this irritates the students sometimes because maybe I can see here on the this is right side. Thank you. On the right side is a professional actor. Maybe she looks a little bit older than a normal pupil, but I think in vocational education it's not the problem, but in general, schon. Yeah. But we don't have results to this, yeah.
And then the one hand in the simulation in the avatars,
Mm.
they could be pupils.
Yeah,
Adults.
yeah, maybe,
And compare the two settings and see
yeah,
what happens there.
yeah. Thank you.
Probably then it's the question what we are comparing. Are we comparing the two settings, or are we comparing children which are more realistic for general teachers with adults which are less realistic for general teachers? So we're even adding more variability in this case. And I have a feeling that there is already a lot of variability here because the cases are also different. So the cases, the situations are different. They can talk to children, they can talk to to supervisors or to the colleagues, and the situations which are role played are different. So it's not only comparing the format here already.
Thank you.
Further questions? Yes.
I'm sure you mentioned it, and I apologize because I've done it today. What would, how were the participants in your avatar for this exhibition prepared for the task?
Sorry.
Was there a difference in how the participants in the exhibitions were prepared for the task? Because I assume not everyone is used to using an avatar.
Yeah. The whole semester, there were randomly assigned before the simulations, and we teach them. This is a learning and teaching environment, and during the semester, they had their seminars in it. So they had a lot of time before the simulations to act with their avatar, and we had a lot of tutorials and tutors who helped. Not, I think, because preparation. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean there was like 2 seminars, so one group the whole semester in Avatar, the other group whole semester in video. So
But we have no preparation in the video camera-based interaction. But to this time they had, I think it was last year when we collected the data and performed the simulations, and there was 1 year Corona, and yeah, most of the seminars took place in video camera-based interaction. So, yeah. 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 Okay. Yeah.
Just wonder that in regards to your qualitative approach, would it be worthwhile to follow within design?
Sorry, it's. Can you speak louder, please?
So with your qualitative methods, would it be worthwhile to follow within design? So you would have the chance that your participants experience both, or your teachers experience both, and they could relate it to each other, and you get this subjective experience, what fits most the experience they made, so that you can compare within persons. Would it be worthwhile?
Can you rephrase it, please? Ich einfach gar nichts. Yeah, yeah. I think. Thank you very much for this question. This is a very good point, because at the moment it seems like for starting the avatar-based interactions is a good opportunity to start with role plays, and then maybe we can go further with video camera-based interactions, and then we can make it in real learning environments. Yeah.
actually when we conducted the focus groups, like the natural, so to speak, comparison was always if I compare it to like real environment, or that would be more case in both avatar and video, always they compare it often to real life situations.
Mm. Yeah.
I can help on that, because if you're using the virtual environment, I think it gets, in this case, interesting, and you create situations that you cannot evoke in real situations, like you have very critical situations where the child does not behave like it should behave, and you can specifically train the kind of teachers how to react to these kind of situations. So this is for me, myself, the interesting part why I should use virtual reality, because you can get everything in your hand, and not only experimentally, but also with regards to application.
But maybe we have in the avatar-based interaction less or more inhibition, so it's easier to conduct the simulations. Yeah. Whatever. Thank you.
I think one or two questions would be fine, and then yes. It's the name of the program for the avatar.
It's TriCAT Spaces.
TriCAT.
TriCAT.
T-R-I-C-A-T.
Yeah.
company, so we had to pay for it, and we had like extra conditions because we had an emergency, but still, that's definitely a critical point because we could not afford it to use it
Mm.
forever.
Yeah.
And, but still, it was the best we could do at that moment when we did the study. But again, we could think about doing it by ourselves, but then we would need some IT specialists really starting to do what we learned.
Yeah.
Actually, my experience is data security issues. I think it's a lot of political talk, let's say, in higher education. From my experience, students are really not so much prepared. I mean, you guarantee all of them, and everybody has the right to sell. So, but we officially said, okay, if you don't want to be recorded or so, we record the video. We guarantee everybody the right to say, no, I don't want to include my video or so. But
Yeah.
Maybe the question was already asked, but I'm really struggling with hearing everything with the audio. So the question is, did you actually compare like your avatar-based platform with real role play, where actors come into the faculty and actually have the role play person to person?
No, we haven't. At
That would be really interesting to see if it actually benefits.
yeah.
And that would be like the question that would be something where you create difficult situations, and it would be also time efficient and
Mm. Yeah. Thank you. This is a good point, but maybe we can do this in the next steps. Yeah.
I think we have data from your project. So
Yeah.
in this case, this was not possible because it was during Corona and no real life environments were allowed there. So we said, okay, we make avatar versus video. But here in Braun is also a huge project that should do this in real life. So maybe, as you said, the next step would be combining two data sets, video avatar versus real life. Because of course, this will see the next thing that we have.
Yeah.
maybe another question, did you notice differences between the master students and the bachelor students?
And not at the moment yet, but this is something we want to do. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Then thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And then Dorothee.
Yeah.
No, because it's that time of the day, I would like to stand up. And I know, would it be possible if I talk like this? Would you be able to? Yeah? Okay, perfect. Because it also keeps maybe you and me a bit more active. Let's see if it works.
Do you want to go in the middle?
No, it's okay,
No?
it's fine. I just
Yeah,
stand here.
Then
Yes, all right.
to the side.
No, it's fine.
More space to run.
Well, yeah, I'm a bit of a mover, so yeah. Well, I need this when I'm talking. So thanks for inviting me in this symposium. I'm going to talk to you about fostering social persuasion as a source of self-efficacy and negotiating through simulation design. And this is a study I conducted with Anne Veerman. She couldn't be here. She was a master's student of mine. Now she's working as an educational advisor in secondary vocational education in the Netherlands. So she was also not able to register for early. She's not in the program, but I really want her to take the credits for this research. And it's actually a study that builds further on the PhD that I defended in 2019. And I conducted research in a specific simulation, and that are role-play simulations of political decision-making. So simulations that are used for political science students to get them acquainted with political institutions, the way of negotiating, decision-making processes, lawmaking, and all that is related to that. So I'm going to take you a bit with me in my PhD project because that is where the work is grounded in, and I just will then elaborate on the study that Anna did during Corona also. So when I started that PhD, what I encountered is that simulations, role plays, simulation games, it was all a bit interchangeably used. So I really had a kind of conceptual issue, and I tried to grasp what are the features that define such a learning environment. So what I did, specific in the context of political science simulations, I focused on the role-play simulations, is I tried to figure out, are there certain features that are actually, that can be used to define the different learning environments and to help us, if we look for design elements, how these elements should be balanced. And two of those factors, components, elements, as you want to name them, are human agency and structure. And the structure is actually what the teacher or the designer, if it's a digital simulation, intends to be in that simulation. So it's something that it's rather fixed on a long term. It's the duration of your simulation, the number of participants you decide on. While the human agency is actually when the participant comes into the simulation, the way that the participant is handling the simulation. So the way, if they have to enact a role, how they do that, the way they behave in that simulation. And actually for me, that was helpful in order to try to understand if we talk about a certain real world degree, which is also defined as verisimilitude in the literature, if we want to try to grasp that concept, what is actually happening? And then actually the real world degree of a simulation is a kind of trade-off between the structure of the simulation, what you have designed, so the learning context of the simulation-based context, and on the other hand, the freedom that participants have to deviate in that environment. And if your structure is not structured enough, they will deviate and probably maybe make some decisions or actions that are not really reality-based. So it's really a kind of difficult balance to try to get that in a way so that the verisimilitude is fostered. Also, because I was specifically focusing on role-play simulations, we have different students that come together. They play a role. I'll give you an example on the next slide. And they start interacting. So something is happening in that simulation, and sometimes things happen that aren't always intended by the teacher or that aren't always that real-world related. So also the social dynamics, the dynamism, as it's called on the slide, is something that only can be controlled by the teacher if the teacher tries to find the right balance between the structure and the possibilities of agency of the students. Now, to give you an example, I take you with me, because I did it for 4 years, to the political science department, so come with me. Design elements of structure and agency. If you look at those decision-making processes, they can focus on a regional level, a national level, international level, EU level. I don't know if you've heard about the Model United Nations. There are really, really many of them. We have students that travel the world around to get, we do these conferences a bit, so they go to certain places and they follow where those Model United Nations are being organized. So would I take you with me into a European Union simulation? So if we talk about structure, the teacher can decide, what do I want to simulate? Will I just simulate the European Council, which is here on the picture? Or do I also want the European Parliament included? Do I want some press, media, also that is simulated to get acquainted with the process? Well, for example, if we focus on a role, I'm with a lot of Germans in the company, so I chose for Angela Merkel. This could be the role that I got assigned as a student. So if we look at the structure, if I as a teacher decide this role is going to be in the simulation, then I can decide on which structural components do I want Angela Merkel to experience. The standard ones, the formal meetings they have, like really the European Council boring talks, which have a lot of rules of procedure, or do I also want to include the more informal parts, where they can get connected outside of the formal standard meeting. If we then look at the student side, we talk about the agency. The student at the next, Angela Merkel can decide on which will be my partners, my allies. Will I choose this person as being my friend? Will I try to form a coalition or not? Also, the person decides on how to behave in those standard meetings. Will the person be absent, quiet, or choose to influence, to be a kind of leader? And again, also the informal part, but even that is broadened, because I as a teacher can decide on some informal program, but the students themselves can also decide that they want to have contact with certain other participants because they are really interesting for some amendment they want to make on kind of law, whatever it's called. I don't know the real. Okay. So in those simulations, we tried to find how are we going to measure learning. And what we were really interested in is actually the process. So if there's a certain design of a simulation, what happens? You have simulations that take up to 1 hour, to 1 day, to 3-4 days. And it's rather difficult to grasp the real objective performance, like negotiating skills, because it's a kind of process. So we chose for a measure that is closer to the participants, self-efficacy, because that is a kind of perception. That is something that they can talk about themselves, and that we did not really need to bother about measuring something objectively, because that would make it too complex. As educational scientists, I suppose that you know what self-efficacy is. We all should know how important it is, what is proven, that it's increased engagement, it helps students to work harder, to persist longer, and it fosters skill development. Well, we chose to focus on self-efficacy in negotiating. Why? Because it's better to choose self-efficacy to a specific task or a specific skill. So this is the skill that we chose, and also because it's a skill that they need. If you do not negotiate, they're actually not engaging. It's just, you have to negotiate to make sure that you participate in the simulation. Now here you see some examples of which sub-skills that actually are related to negotiating. And a specific one which makes the combination, in my opinion, also very interesting is the component of resilience, because self-efficacy fosters persistence, so also resilience if you have a drawback, and actually that is also something that is really important if you're negotiating and there's a kind of deadlock going on. How does this process of self-efficacy development look like in those simulations? This is still a bit of the work that I did before I supervised with her master thesis. We conducted a longitudinal study, 12 measurements over 4 days, and we tried to grasp how self-efficacy developed. So on average, across all students, we find a linear increase that was significant. So woohoo, we have a p-value, we could publish, we could write about that. But what bothers me most is that if I took 16 random students, it differed. There's no way that you can see of those 16 that they all gradually increase over those 4 days. So we were puzzled. So we wanted to probe into the process of the simulation a bit more, so we needed qualitative work. So then we conducted a study, also in a 4-day simulation, and what we find there is if we look at the sources, because that is also the theory of self-efficacy, we have mastery experience, vicarious experience, social persuasion, and emotional physiological state. We found indeed those sources in the simulation. So we grouped them as personal sources, social sources, and contextual sources. And what we saw is that the social persuasion source could be divided into direct and indirect messages. So in this type of simulation, it's not just positive feedback or a compliment, but it's also a student that wants to collaborate with you. That is a kind of social persuasion source. So it's not explicitly said, but it's the action of the other student that also is experienced as a positive feedback. Personal sources, that is what all literature said. Mastery experience is one of the most important. That is also what we found was always included in the events that we took a look at. And the social sources always contributed to self-efficacy increase. Now that is what I found really interesting, and that is what I wanted to, what I talked about with Anne. If she could probe a bit more in depth into that and maybe take a look, if that source is so important, would it be possible to try to get a notion of which design elements foster this type of source? Contextual sources, actually that had to do with the authenticity and the experience verisimilitude of the simulation. We find them, they were present but less prominent. So actually the authenticity didn't seem that important for the self-efficacy and negotiating development. Okay, so this was what I had in my head when I talked to Anna and she had to do her master thesis. So we came up with the following questions. What design elements can be observed? So we wanted to try to, on a micro level, get some idea about structure. What is structure? Agency, what is agency? what messages of social persuasion, so if we talk about direct, indirect, what is that? Are there any examples? And then we just wanted to know, could we like find a co-occurrence, a relationship between the two? What we did, now I was talking about European simulations, not just because, also because that is the context in which I did my research. Eurosim is a very big simulation. It combines 20 universities of the US and the EU that come together 1 year in Europe, 1 year in the US. And I think there are over 20 universities represented. And the participants simulate EU decision making, and there are really many actors. Actually, almost all actors are represented. Parliament, Council, the Commission, and there's press also present. We were in 2021, so we were in a lockdown, so it couldn't be done physically. So teachers choose to use the avatar environment of Virbela, I don't know how it's pronounced in English. But it's an avatar environment, so this means that students were represented by an avatar. They could walk around. It looked a bit like this. I don't know if you can see that clearly. So they had their names of their role, of their character. Above them, they could walk around, and then there were certain locations in the avatar environment where they could enter, and if somebody else entered, they could understand each other, they could talk to one another. We wanted to keep the variation between the students as low as possible, so we chose for one university, one course that prepared the students for the simulation. So we talked about preparation before, so that the preparation was similar for the students. And then we had a class in Antwerp of 11 students, and 4 students gave their permission to participate in the research. And what we did is the case study that I shortly mentioned before. We used the way we collected the data in a similar way in this study. So we were looking for critical events that students found meaningful in an increase or decrease of self-efficacy and negotiating. In the previous study, there is elaborate methodological longitudinal case study design that has been published recently in Studies and Educational Evaluation. So if you want to more about that, please take a look at that one. But what we did is we used the measure and we tweaked them to the social persuasion source. So students were asked to daily complete a diary, which asked them for critical events in relation to other students. We had 4 students, there were 4 days, and they each day were asked to complete a diary with an event for increase as well as a decrease of self-efficacy and negotiating. After the simulation, within 48 hours, so there wouldn't be too much time between the simulation and the interview, we interviewed the students, and we came to a total of 8 events to analyze. Why? Because at the end of the simulation, they had several events, but we didn't know if they were equally meaningful. So we chose for each student the most meaningful event about a decrease and the most meaningful event about an increase of self-efficacy and negotiating. What was done is thematic content analysis, deductively, structure, agency, social persuasion, the different features, different forms it can emerge in, and we coded inductively all the other teams that popped up in the data, and we used Atlas TI for this, and then also some co-occurrence tables to try to figure out, do we see any co-occurrence between design and the source. So what about the results? If you look at structure, these were the 3 aspects that were mentioned by students. The formal program, those are really, remember the picture with the table and the chairs, these were really the meetings that were formally structured. The rules of procedure were mentioned, and breaks as a program element. If we look at agency, student mentioned preparation, and then preparations of the other students, so either a well-prepared or a not well-prepared student. Role performance has to do with the quality, so the extent to which the way they play their role is qualitative, is positively evaluated or not, while the amount of participation has to do with, is that person absent or not, present or not. And then there was also informal contact that is distinguishable from the breaks, because that has to do with any informal contact that students initiated themselves And that could also be related to the formal program. For example, if something is happening and the discussion is going in a certain direction, and or the student was in the European Council, and the student knows that this could have consequences for the other student from the same country that was in the parliament, they texted each other, they used WhatsApp, so that is what is meant by informal contact. If we looked at messages of social persuasion, we have direct positive, we found positive feedback, as we know it, the compliments, but also an extra layer, namely helpful informative feedback. So that was not just that was good, but also extra information, why something was good, what they did well. So that was content-wise more valuable for students. Indirect positive, so the outcome of the negotiation, was I able to solve a deadlock, for example. Relational aspects, collaborating, getting to know each other, building relationships with students they didn't know before the simulation started, and experiencing support. Then we have the negative messages, negative feedback. There was only one event mentioned like that, so that's really something you didn't do that well. Verbally negative feedback. And also indirect, these were present as in a lack of participation, students that weren't present, or a lack of support, if literally they were they had the expectation that somebody would support them, and that didn't happen. So if we looked at this, then we saw that breaks and informal contact are actually something that brought the structure and the agency element together, because that has to do with how the student informally enacts, performs in the simulation. With regard to the messages, we noticed that especially the indirect part was very important for them, probably because that is the most closely related to the performance they have to do, to the skills they have to show, and also the outcome of the simulation. We noticed that every indirect positive message was related to an informal moment, either in the breaks and or by means of informal contact. So that indirect positive was really that informal element that highlighted, and extra remarkable is that the indirect negative was related to several elements, but never to the informal elements of the simulation. So what did we conclude from this exploratory study? That informal contact element in those simulations for fostering self-efficacy and negotiating is really an important one. It pops up, it shows to be important. We also noticed that there are some overlapping messages in the social persuasion, so it could be that somebody gives you support and that it's also experienced as, and now I have to take a look because, what did I want to say at this time? I can't remember, just asking afterwards if you want to know. I'm sorry. Also that there's an interplay of the sources, because we do realize that if we talk about the outcome of simulations, you could also evaluate that as mastery experience, but actually so the several sources and how these relate, also the framework of self-efficacy sources needs further exploration. I want to emphasize it's an exploratory study, and what is really interesting, and I still would like to do something like that, is it's actually also an intervention. I experienced in my previous work when we used diaries and we collected data, we are actually also doing an intervention. And in my previous PhD study, students also mentioned that they really learned something from themselves, and that it really helped them like to make the choices the next day. So we should be aware of that in work like this. The specific Verbella setting, it's an online simulation. Informal communication was not connected to diplomatic behavior, because they could text, they were just an avatar, nobody could notice. It could be in a face-to-face, that it would be not that diplomatic enough. So maybe that was a bit of showed differently in an online simulation. Also, they were avatars, so they got no non-verbal feedback. And it was easily to just be absent, because if you just didn't do anything behind your computer, there was nobody that would approach you in one way or the other. What for educational practice? So I do think that we should try to unravel how these things are designed, and how we could try to find the balance between what we design and what we ask from students, and the extent to which they are able to perform what we ask for them. Preparation was mentioned before, it's really an issue. I think it's also really important to look at this, because Students also mentioned it as students that are bad prepared are not that good for the development of their skills, and especially for their self-efficacy then. And also the role of the teacher I want to mention, because this is a student-led simulation. Once that they start, it's only if it's really, really going bad and totally out of hand that the teachers will intervene. Otherwise, it's just student-led. So, but that is also something in these simulations we should think about, and maybe be more conscious about what the role of the teacher is and what the teacher in a certain role could more or less contribute. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dorothy.
I think I went over time, but
You didn't really have a time. That's perfectly fine. So now it's your turn. What are your questions, your contributions?
Thank you very much. There's so many things which I think we have to consider for our research further. But just two things. In the very beginning, when you started with the concept of describing simulation, saying there's the environment and the agent. I'm just thinking I'm missing something here. I like it that you describe it on a formal way of our simulation, how can we vary it. For example, it makes difference whether you have event, that's what you said actually. You can choose, really formal or not formal. And then have you described other characteristics also to describe environment more formally? I know I put it right, but is there a link between the concept of environment and agency? To describe simulation on the one side, and then the students, when I got it correctly, can choose specific characteristics of simulation, like should it be a formal or what role I'm taking on.
so it's the teacher that decides.
The teacher is not.
Yeah, so the information we have about the elements is what popped up qualitatively, so that's not that the students chose the different features. Is that what is that what
That's an important, thank you, it's an important information, but for me, it's a theoretical framework to describe simulations. So in my opinion, we can use the characteristics to categorize different types of simulation. And did you put it together?
No, I use this to distinguish simulations from related phenomena. I did not use it yet to look at different types of simulations. Yeah, so you could actually choose the same figure or the same aspects and just talk about simulations and look at, if we three, for example, would look at what is an avatar, a video-based or a real-life simulation. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Well, we are.
Yeah.
In some ways, I would have feel some ways that it's not actually what is a simulation, and then I thought we didn't have yet a clear definition.
Yeah, but I think that makes it really difficult because we do not know really what is our intervention. It's a cluster of a thing, and that's why I wanted to go into that process and see what happens. But that's on a very detailed level, and that's very difficult to grasp because in those 40 simulations we have a full schedule at the conference. That's the same for the students, and then I want to do research in that, so we're limited in the methods we can use also. Yeah.
If it's a follow-up question, describe, I think we have time or not to leave?
I don't know, I'm just
It's time to stand up. I knew it. It's time to stand up.
First needed to follow up and then
because that's the second
And that makes it so difficult because the students I talked about are also evaluated on their performance. And they are learning, so and that makes it rather complex. Yeah.
Okay, Susan, then.
Thank you. I have a question that might be actually a special question, so this is for later. It's about structure and agency. I'm fascinated by those concepts, and also I think you use them in a very simple way in the design framework. And then I started to try to understand how they are aligned, how the empirical design is aligned with structure and agency, and how agency is structured as well. I somehow felt off the wagon in the middle when it comes to how is agency expressed in the type of design in a self-beginning approach. So if you could just briefly elaborate.
Well, I think the agency aspect is something, if you are a teacher and you design, you can only think of the amount of agency, of freedom degrees that you want students to have, and then you base your design on it. But as a teacher, I think the thing that you can control is the structure. So the trade-off, the balance, we should know more about it to be able for a teacher to decide what structure do I choose that I know that it won't deviate in a way that I do not want the simulation to deviate in those role-play simulations, for example. But I don't know if that relates to your question.
Aren't you limiting the agency if you only limit the teacher to design?
Yeah. No, yeah. Yes, but I think that also is why the preparation is important. Yeah, then you come with the agency element of the students, for example. But yeah, that's, there's no answer, one answer to that.
But I think it's also very important what type of agency are we talking about? Are we talking about agency by design, like what we decided as creators of the simulation, the agency to be? Like I can decide as a creator that, for example, my students have an opportunity to press a hint button. I give them this opportunity. Or I make decisions as a creator, as a designer. And when we come to the actual simulations, we also have something that we can agency there, which is not by design, which is just by running the simulation. Like, because we have very different people in this simulation, we cannot control, we can control the simulation, but we cannot really control the participants, what they do with our simulations. And sometimes they do something that we didn't expect them to do. And it also can be referred to as agency, but it's a different kind of agency again. So I think that we really need to agree first on which scale we're talking about. And I think we can come up back to this for the general discussion as well, because it's a very, very, very important question to be on the same ground.
So we have one or two more questions. I think we have time, 2 minutes. One last question, go ahead. Don't be shy. Time.
2 minutes, but we have time.
The presentation was clear.
Yes, please.
Thank you for your presentation. Do you have information about certain students or groups of students who might benefit from the pathway-based approach face-to-face?
No, that's not included in the data. But as I mentioned, the drawback could be that students could easily disconnect from the simulation. It could also be that some students feel more comfortable. I think that is also something that you've found something that, but I'm going into discussion now. I want to go on.
Wait a minute.
Okay, then thanks a lot, everybody. Thank you very much.
Now you can take it.
We can introduce you.
Yeah.
This is the video that we are not going to show you.
impressive article about simulations and its relationship to competence development. And she has looked through the papers and now will discuss it with us. I'm very happy that you are here. So please.
Yeah, thank you. I will remain seated, sorry. So just probably a few words about my background. I'm working for the last 4 years in the research unit COSIMA, dealing with facilitating diagnostic competencies in teacher and medical education, and I'm working in M project dealing with aggregating data from within the projects and also outside of the projects, looking at the simulation-based learning in higher education, which probably was the reason for me to be invited here, and I'm really thankful for the opportunity to be here and to discuss the papers and talk about the things. I also have to say it was a very challenging task because, well, we heard 2, but actually there were 3 presentations on, well, I mean, the only thing connecting them, they have to do something with simulations. And everything else is so different. There is like a whole zoo of methods to address the differences, quantitative and qualitative. There is a whole bunch of different outcomes which were looked at. Also on the perception level, also on competence level, like the papers are really, really, really different. But still, the challenge is accepted. Probably the thing that I would like to start with is trying to give kind of a definition to what a simulation is, just for us to be on the same ground when we're talking. And you can disagree with me because I really try to collect a few definitions which are not contradicting each other, but still looking from the different perspectives. So we can say that, okay, simulation is kind of a model of real system. And this model allows us to play around and find out how to influence the system, how to control the system, but also to find out what are the connections between variables, just in very general systems, whatever we're talking about. If we're talking about political decisions, or we're talking about teacher education, medical education, economics, whatever we're talking about, we have some kind of system. And within this system, we need to first realize how items are connected with each other, and then we realize how to make them do what we want them to do. There is also a very nice definition of simulation as approximation of practice by Grossman and colleagues, who is actually talking that simulation can be and is an educational tool, because one of the things is this decomposition. We can modify our learning environment in a way that we can learn pretty specific things, or we can focus on something very special, like we can simulate a very rare case which usually is not coming up, or we can, anyway, we can also reduce the complexity and train one particular specific skill. For example, we want to train our teachers to ask appropriate questions, to ask open questions to find out what are the misconceptions or some other issues with student learning. The second part of this approximation of practice is actually approximation. So simulation gives us a very nice, realistic opportunity to be as close to reality as possible, still keeping in mind that we modify this reality to be able to learn. And another big stone for me, milestone here, is defining simulation as interaction. So when I was doing my meta-analysis, looking at all the types of simulation-based learning in higher education, the thing that drove me crazy actually is kind of passive simulations. We use passive simulation, meaning like the students were just watching someone else going through the system. But then I have a question, okay, is passive simulation actually a simulation if I cannot influence, if my decisions that I make do not influence the system in any way? What do I learn? Well, I still can learn through observations. We also know that learning through observation works. But can we call it simulation? Good question. So the only thing that I also have like issues with from Cook's definition is that he is not actually taking role play as simulations. For him, it should be something like, it should be a tool, or it should be a computer or something device with this the learners physically interact. And we had this discussion. They just said, well, we put that aside, and we say, well, we are too curious. We are not putting that aside. And we decided that for us, for the research group, we want to put everything together more or less. So we say that yes, simulation is an interaction with real virtual object device or a person, and simultaneously having the opportunity to alter the flow of this interaction. This is the most important for us, like interaction, and this interaction alters something, at least, with the decisions and actions made by learners. And there is also always some kind of critical thinking or problem solving, because, I mean, what else is simulated? So the learners should make decisions. They should take an active role in the development, in the skill development, whatever skill we're talking about. So we were focusing on, firstly, on diagnostic competencies, but then for another meta-analysis on the whole range of complex cognitive skills that can be there. And I mean, yeah, we found out that simulations work, and we have no idea why. Well, I mean, there are a lot of features and a lot of dimensions and a lot of factors that influence simulations. And from the meta-analysis, I can say, yeah, when we take an average, simulations have very good effects for learning. It was like 0.85, like really cool. But we also have huge heterogeneity there. Some simulations work really perfect and great. Some are not working. And of course, we wanted to know why. And what we found out there is actually there are multiple ways to come to the good simulation. There is no like one size fits all. It doesn't work like this. There are multiple dimensions and also multiple ways to success. And here we also saw the very different approaches to simulation design, focusing on very specific topics. So when I was reading 3 papers simultaneously on my screen, like trying to put them together, I was also thinking about creating some kind of a model for myself to be able to put things together. And like an insight came yesterday during the nice keynote on the feedback. So yes, context matters, definitely. It definitely matters what are you using simulations for. Do you use them for assessment or do you use them for learning? If you use them for learning, are you working with high or low prior knowledge? If you use them for learning, do you use them to teach some typical cases, or do you use them to show something that probably is not coming up very often in the real life, but still is important to learn? It definitely matters which domain you're working in. Is it mathematical education? Is it political science? Is it medicine? Definitely everything matters. So I cannot build a model which will be universal, still I tried. And it is not like the official like a disclaimer, it's not official statement. This is the model that was born during this conference, and of course it has some drawbacks, but still to be able to talk about at least these 3 presentations, 2 presentations which you heard and 3 presentations that I read together. So there is one, and we are talking from the design perspectives. We are not talking from the perspective of what is actually happening after we let it go, but we are talking about what we can do when we design, when we decide how it should look like. And one of the dimensions that should be there is actually complexity. Complexity has something to do with our simulations being realistic, of course, so it has to do with authenticity. It also has to do with the amount of information that we put in this learning environment. Do we, for example, simulate the whole classroom where our teachers have, are faced with the whole, I don't know, 20, 40 pupils, and they are doing some classroom management, for example? Or is it like one-to-one talk? I would say like talking one-to-one is a little bit reduced complexity anyway, especially if we're talking about teachers. If we're talking about doctors, it's a different situation. They usually work face-to-face, but anyway. So one thing is amount of information we put in our simulation. Another thing is actually control. What amount of control do we have over the elements? Do we, as designers, not as participants? Like, we say like, okay, this variable can vary, and you can have a very complex system, and at some point your events become some kind of unpredictable, and this is exactly something about the simulation, the presentations you didn't hear about, but still, this control thing, like, you can make it easy. You can make like, if you do this, then it's this. Like, you can write the rules for your simulations, how your environment reacts on some decisions. And of course, it's up to you how much control you want. It also has something to do how much control the learners and the participants have, but I promise that we stay on the design level. And one more thing, it cannot be two-dimensional, sorry. So one more thing is the way we present this simulation to our learners. Do we, like the format, for example, do we do it live? Do we do it agent-based? Do we do it in any other way? Also some instructional support that we put in, like everything, how we sell our learning environment to the world, more or less. And the three presentations, sorry, I will be talking about three because I was reading about three, but anyway. So the three presentations today, they can be situated here. So, for example, the first presentation, they are more talking about the presentation formats. Although, for me, if you want to, I mean, you also were talking about, you were not talking about, but your simulations included some level of complexity and variability of the situation. So it was a little bit too much variance, but anyway, I will be talking as that. So this is something that I have in my head to talk about the papers today. And you can disagree with me, I'm totally fine with it. Just the matter of putting things together. So with the studies, the first study about avatar and video camera-based environments, you were talking about communicative competencies, cool. Learner's experience, which is also cool that you targeted it from actually multiple perspectives, and the main idea was to compare two simulation formats. That's my facet in summary. And what I really find great in what you're doing is actually that you are using data from multiple sources, that you have this external observation and you have this self-assessment thing, really cool. And you also have focus groups to discuss like what are the pros and cons of the format. So you have the information that can be used. It's not just numbers that saying, well, probably there is no really difference between the formats, but it also something that can be used. As I said, like what I would probably prefer more is a little bit less variability in the simulations themselves, in the cases that you used. Because, I mean, it could be talking with kid, or it can be talking with supervisor, or it can be talking with a parent. Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about the very general communication skills, definitely that's cool, but still, what's your focus? Are you trying to compare formats? And then you really need to probably keep the other sources of variability a little bit lower. Or you're just trying to show that this cool stuff works. By the way, I think you didn't mention if there was an increase between pre and post test, and I guess it was. But it would be nice to know. So I think that they really learned, and you can show that even with this kind of, well, I wouldn't call it simple, it's still a lot of work inside, but still simple simulation, you can really increase some competences and skills, which is cool. The open questions for me for this particular presentation was actually how would we, all of us, it's actually a question to all of us, what will we do with non-significant results? Does it actually mean that the format doesn't matter? Or does it actually mean that we don't have enough power to see the differences? Or does it mean that we need kind of more research with more participants or with less cases? So I think that it's very insightful what you did, but it would be nice to think where to go from there. And also like how generalizable are the results? What can we do with them? And in terms of replicability, it would be definitely interesting, I think, for all of us to know a little bit more about the environmental scenarios, because if I decide to do something similar, I'm in trouble. I have no, well, I mean, I know where you took your cases from, but still it would be really, really nice to know a little bit more in terms of sharing the good experiences and transfer of good practices. And also with measurement tools, for me it was also a little bit too much variability, because the questions that you asked the students, the participants themselves, were, as I understood, different from the questions, from the checklists that the external observers were filling in, which is also okay, but it would be interesting to see, for example, if you give them the very similar questions, how does it work with objective and subjective measures? Like, do the students also capture the changes that the external observers capture when they're observing them? And for external observers, there was only one observation, so there was no kind of change. It was during the simulation, but there was no pre-test for the external observers, right? So it was just, yeah, so it is just something that would be probably beneficial for the project. You still can disagree. The second presentations, which you were unfortunately not able to listen to, I can skip it.
Just very short or skip it, because I think from time,
Yeah.
it would be better to have a discussion.
Yeah, I will just say that if you have an opportunity to come to the guys and ask for the video, it would be really cool, because this exact paper presented the classroom management simulation, and they were talking about balancing the complexity and the control, something that I was talking about in the beginning, like not making the simulation too easy and allowing it to vary, like you give some characteristics to the agents within the simulation, and then they kind of live their own life, something very close to the real classroom. But yeah, I'm not talking about that too much.
But, yeah, this was a good point. So just if you are interested in the video of Michael, just write to me or Julia, and we will clarify with Michael is agreeing to share it with you.
Yeah.
I think you should. I mean, I really enjoyed the presentation and the abstract, so I think it's something really, really cool, and you might be interested in further cooperations, especially if you're staying in teacher education. But yeah, it's my...
The video is just 15 minutes, so...
Yeah, that's okay. If we have time afterwards, yeah, we can just a small group, whatever. And the third paper by Dorothy, it was also cool. From my perspective, it was cool because you were also trying to explore like multiple elements. You were looking at, like you were also trying to create this kind of conceptual framework and decide which elements are important and what are the processes there. So it's also simulations, social persuasion, and self-efficacy in a totally different domain. Well, in a different domain, which is not a teacher education. So the goals are different. The procedures are also different. So I think that it is very enriching when we are talking across domains and trying to find the commonalities there. So the main strength for me is exploring this kind of multiple elements. And the open question for me for this presentation is actually, if we can generalize what you have found to the other domains, it would be interesting to know. And I would also be very interested in how would you interpret the co-occurrences, and what will we further do with the findings. So I think it could be cool. And also, you were talking about different opportunities, like making it only formal or adding some other elements, so how the complexity and control in simulated scenario can be balanced, can be covered. So it left open for me from your presentation, and I think it can be part of the discussion. And just the very last slide for everyone, together with all the open questions for each and every paper and for all of us, I think that we can also go a little bit in the direction of what's next, because we heard like two stories of success, and it would be a good question, where can we go from these two stories of success, how we can build on them and go on. So this is my input.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Olga.
You're welcome.
So, I will give it to the audience now. We have questions for Olga or to the audience. Start.
Can we comment on your model? If I understood correctly, it was born in the last 2 days. There's 3 dimensions.
Yeah. So it was.
I think this is really a question. I think in this format, the comment on the model is.
Yeah, I'm.
Because you said at the very end the transfer, and I would suggest the 4th dimension here.
Oh, okay.
The transfer, validity in terms of ecological validity. So
Mm-hmm.
how far does the simulation that I run in my education process mimic the real world situation? I would just predict that the closer the better the transfer. Because complexity, I think, complexity is regarding the past. Complexity so that I allow models to better understand basic
Yeah.
the complexity implementation is regards how much I would like to invest in my simulation, for example, or like a 3-hour simulation.
Well, I think that if we take just the dimension of complexity, we can actually split that dimension of complexity in 3 parts as well. So this is very general thing.
Yeah.
For me, what I said, the part of the complexity is how realistic it is, because the real situation is usually more complex. And the question is how much close to this real situation I want to be, and this means how much complexity I put inside.
I fully agree, but if you regard complexity in terms of task complexity, you have a very simple task, but it's not
It's-
high, doesn't have high ecological validity, so the transfer is
Yeah.
very low. And you can play around with this regarding competition. Sorry, I'm quite
But I agree in the way that there has to be a certain complexity to be able to talk about a simulation. Because otherwise we're just talking about not whole task exercise, but part task and then it's another, I think that's something else, a part task as exercise, then a certain complexity that you really want and need, and that is, I think, the ecological validity. I also had a discussion about political science simulations that teachers asked me, or other personal professionals, like, yeah, but what do they learn from it for their professional life? They're really specific. So I think it all starts also with learning goals.
Yeah.
That is the most important, I think. Also with the virtual teacher education simulation, what do we want them to learn from it? And what can they learn from it? Because the virtual simulation is not the same as real life.
It still can have elements, and it really depends on what we are teaching. Do we want them to teach some strategies to cope with reality? Do we want them to learn some pedagogical strategies? Do we want them to just try things out and see how it works on the system? So there are like very multiple things, and I think really that this, like each dimension here can be also split in multiple, because when we're talking about the control as well, and the presentation as well. So that's why I was really careful saying that for me it is the opportunity to put the 3 papers together, but I wouldn't say this is the answer to what the simulation is and what are the features of simulations, because for the meta-analysis we had a whole different, a big different model of what we're talking about when we're talking about simulations. And actually, if you're interested in further reading in what I'm doing and what my research my research group is doing. The research group I'm involved in, you can also have some information about our research group on like a website or on Twitter. You can also always write me and ask the questions that you have. Still, it's not like the end. If you still have questions, we can still talk about them. I knew it would be popular, yeah?
Well, it is thanks to the picture that I imagine you conceive those dimensions as independent from each other, because you put them in an orthogonal system. So my suggestion would be, once you are clear about what's inside each dimension, and you analyze them independently, that you think about what will be the relationship between them. Because I think that they are not as independent as the picture suggests.
Well, I mean, it's three-dimensionality, and each point will have coordinates on each of the scale, actually, so they are not independent. Like, each simulation will have something to do with complexity, which is presented in that or other way, and also the control given. It's very difficult to present a three-dimensional model on two-dimensional screen, but I think that I got the points. Yes.
I'm referring to your last, thank you very much for your talk. Your last slide where you put up the general question. And thank you for discussing us and pointing at the generalization. I should agree. But in my head, that's what I heard reading your paper. Actually, the simulation works. It works. We don't know why. And we don't know how to reduce the complexity, because sometimes we don't want to reduce the complexity. And that's why they use simulation. And that's my point. Sometimes I agree, our research has to be predictable, and it has to have a generalization idea, insight, whatever. But I'm wondering, sometimes there might be learning going on where we cannot really exactly say why it's going on. And I think Dorothy showed that each student had a very different curve of learning. But still, using simulation does stimulate learning. And it might stimulate learning in a very individual way. And that's why we cannot measure, and that's why we don't want to reduce the complexity. That's just my,
Yeah.
with your publication.
Yeah. Well, I mean, reducing complexity is not always bad. So it's not like we did another meta-analysis recently about salience of information and authenticity and instructional support, talking that actually, well, instructional support will reduce the complexity, but it doesn't mean that it will harm authenticity. It also doesn't mean that if I make some relevant information more salient to the learners, it doesn't mean that I kill my authenticity with that. And actually, we also have some findings there. But yeah, discussable.
So the last comment and question is
I think I'm going to address you then. It's a complex question again. I'm not interested in quite a complex discussion as a matter, but complexity isn't about the fact that clear for aspects of learning goals that you as a teacher are pursuing that are related to design, right? And they can be design. And then there's this aspect of, and that's what I was trying to refer to agency, degree of freedom, how much degree of freedom can be that to be able to that form. And that's not necessary. But so what are your thoughts about it in your own studies?
Something came to my mind because you asked your question before I had some time to think. Because about the agency part, when you said do you not reduce it too much if you just say that teachers have control about structure, I think the interesting thing is trying to take control over the agency part, trying to figure out, because I see simulations for me either they're a learning environment or an assessment environment. But if they are a learning environment, often, at least simulations that I know, are part of a broader learning environment. There's a preparation, there's a reflection, and the simulation is just a simulation-based learning exercise. So I think in the broader learning environment, we should try to figure out which elements contribute in what way once the simulation is processed by the students. And then I do agree with you that teachers also, I think, would be able to influence the agency of the students by preparing them in a certain way. Question is how? Yeah, but I really think for me the preparatory phase is for now the most important. I think you also asked that question. Yeah, that's also
the question is about, sorry, it's not learning. It's not learning. Whether an end is should mimic reality or something else. Yeah, it's still not learning. It's something ending. And that's the thing. And how can we capture that part and replicate it? It's not only the strictly designed component, but it's also the other component, the action component.
But it works in two ways, because if I talk to the professionals, the European political scientists that design the simulations, they do it from a kind of passion, a very intuitive thing. So then I came around and I started talking from a designer-learner perspective, and then there's so much learning in there they don't even know. When you look at the learning goals, they only have knowledge-based, cognitive-based learning goals, but there's much more in there. Yeah. So we have work to do. Yeah.
So thanks a lot for this nice discussion. Thanks a lot to our presenters. Thanks to all of you.